Griselda has been a breath of fresh air in today's trapped out rap scene. Their unique style has really made them stand out. And behind all the bars, flows, and the actual rapping that people love, there's one key thing that sets them apart: the genius production behind their records. So today we're going to be making 2 Griselda inspired beats, going in depth behind all the production techniques used in their best beats, and see how you can apply those techniques to your own beats. So sit back and get ready to go into the dark, gritty, and soulful world of Griselda's production. Griselda is made up by 3 main members: Westside Gunn, Conway the Machine, and Benny the Butcher. And like I was saying, Griselda's sound really stands out compared to the typical music that you hear in mainstream rap nowadays. It's uneasy, gritty, soulful, beautiful, and ugly all at the same time, but in the best way. Overall, it just feels raw. And the key thing to getting that raw, ugly, but also beautiful kind of sound is using vintage samples. And later on in this video, I'm going to show you how you can actually make your own vintage samples 100% from scratch. But one of my favorite things about their production is that they're using actual samples. And these samples are so good that oftentimes they don't even use drums on the tracks. They just keep the drums from the original sample.
You go sooner. We the Death Squad, but I shoot solo on Ratman. Right hand holding the steering wheel. Praise fly, praise stove, praise both.
Sampling is such a big part of their sound, so I'm going to spend a while in this video talking about how to find samples, how to flip them, and all of that, so stay with me. Anyways, when I think of those dark, grimy, sample-based beats that you hear Griselda on, 2 producers come to mind: Conductor and The Alchemist. So in order to make this beat as accurate as possible, I went back and studied some videos where they're talking about their process of how they find samples, what they look for, how they flip them, and all that kind of stuff. And one thing that stuck out to me with Conductor talking about how he digs for his samples is when he was talking about not overthinking your sample selection and just listening for a texture, a tone, and a feeling that you like.
There's 2 motivating factors. Those 2 motivating factors are, does it make a sound, and can I record it? There's no extra thought process.
So essentially, when he's digging for the samples for these beats, he's not really thinking strategically in his head like what part can be chopped. He's just listening for a tone and a vibe that he likes, and then he'll figure out what to do with it later once the idea gets going. So when looking for the sample for our beat, I just wanted to look for something that gave me that dark, grimy Griselda, Westside Gunn kind of feeling. And to start, I instantly went to one of the best places to find samples to flip: Tracklib. They recently just put out their mobile app, which is super dope for finding samples, because no matter where you are, if you're not in front of your laptop working, you could be going through samples and getting beat ideas on the go. So you could essentially just listen to music on Tracklib like you would on an Apple Music or a Spotify or listening to podcasts. And then when something grabs your ear, you can save it into the Beatmaker tab, mess around with looping it, chopping it, matching it with other samples, pitching, all this kind of stuff. So let's say if you were sitting on a train, in class, in a work meeting where you're not paying attention, whatever it is, instead of just mindlessly scrolling, watching reels and stuff like that, you could be scrolling through samples and coming up with beat ideas that you could go in and drag into your DAW later to actually flesh out. And whenever they sent me over this app, that workflow just felt so dope to me. So I just chilled in the coffee shop for a bit, listening to old jazz and soul records to try to find something that just had that Griselda kind of texture and tone to it. Anyways, after saving a bunch of songs that were in the right direction, it was time to choose one to actually flip. And to help me make that choice, I took inspiration from one of my favorite instruments that you can hear in these Griselda beats: the piano. I just love the texture that those pianos have in those samples, so I wanted to find something kind of similar. And after going back through all those records that I had saved, I found this sample that had a ton of those jazzy, crazy piano runs, and also already had that super old, fucked up Griselda kind of sound. I felt like this piano had that super cool, like crazy piano kind of sound, but it had more of a vibe of some of the more like soulful, beautiful sounding samples that Griselda uses, like these ones. So combining those dark, eerie pianos with this more soulful kind of vibe all in one sample felt perfect. So now that I had a sample picked out, this is where I took some game from The Alchemist.
In the early days, when I first started, I was always doing the sample first. After a while, I felt like it was getting kind of boring. Let me get a drum going, or like a pattern or some tempo, so that way I have like a starting point, and then as I'm mixing in records, it becomes more unpredictable. A lot of the records I sample, the moment might just happen for 5 seconds. It just might be a 2-bar moment, a or an intro or an outro.
So essentially, as you heard with that, Alchemist actually starts with the drums and then listens through samples with the drums playing until he hears something that kind of matches what he's going for with the drums or just sparks some kind of creative idea. And then once he finds that one moment, he chops that and fits the sample into the groove of the drums, not the other way around. And I feel like working with the samples in this kind of way ends up making the sample chops sound a little bit less predictable, maybe sometimes a little bit off time, but it works nicely with the drums. I feel like you just come up with way different stuff than if you're just chopping with just a metronome and then adding drums later. But before we get started with that drum loop and chopping the sample, I wanted to take some inspiration from this clip that I saw of Conductor recording the audio from a vinyl record into his MPC to chop. So since I don't have an MPC or this sample on vinyl, to kind of emulate that, I just took the whole entire sample and put it through the cassette emulation on my Chroma Console guitar pedal. And then I added some more detune and more filters just to kind of warp the tone of the sample even more. Even though this is already a vintage sample, I just wanted to do that extra added step to just make it more grimy and warped and weird sounding. Now that we have the sample ran through the Chroma Console, I went to go find a drum loop in my files. And for these Griselda beats, you want to stick to around 70 to 80 BPM to really get that pocket right. But anyways, I grabbed this drum loop from my boy Scottzilla, but I'm not even going to use these drums in the actual full beat. It's essentially just going to be taking the place of the metronome, being something that I can get a rhythm and record chops on top of. Cool, so now we got the drum loop. I want you to take one more listen to the sample, and if you listen closely, you can tell that it's in 3/4 time.
There is
1, 2,
nothing
3, 2, 2, 3,
and no
3, 2, 3,
one.
4, 2, 3. Problem is, whenever you're making these boom bap type of beats, you're gonna be working in 4/4. So if you're trying to chop a sample that's in a completely different time signature, it's gonna be really hard to get it on tempo with what you've got going on. At least you would think. But one thing I've kind of figured out recently is it matters more the rhythm of how you chop and where the chops start than it does the actual sample being perfectly in time. So essentially what I'm saying is you can have a bunch of chops that are not directly in time with the BPM that you're trying to work with, but if you follow the groove of the drums with your chops and you chop fast enough, you won't be able to tell that it's off beat. So without worrying about the specific timing, I just went through the whole sample and listened for cool little moments that I liked the way it sounded. And in the playlist, I just manually chopped each one of those. And if you look at the whole sample in my project, you can see that I really did listen through the whole entire sample for little moments that I liked, because you could see how deep in the song I went to find like a one tiny little chop. But anyways, I loaded all those chops into my sampler, pitched everything down 4 semitones, and played in this main pattern over the drum break. And just a disclaimer, the drum break is not sounding perfect, but again, it's just there to help me kind of get that groove when I was playing in these sample chops. Once I had that, I needed some variation for my B section, so I just played the chops a little bit differently, swapping like 1 or 2 of the chops here and there. But as you could hear when I play that back, on one of those chops, there's this weird kind of silence. So let me show you how to fix that. All right, so if we listen to this chop right here, it kind of stops too early, right? And I don't like how stop and go that sounds. So one thing that you can do is look around in all the sample chops and try to find a part that isn't really doing anything too crazy, but just kind of has that same ambience and chord that that other one is playing. And I found this chop right up here. And if you just put that somewhere right around here, it kind of masks that part. Right? It doesn't have that huge stop and go like this. So don't be afraid to get creative like that with the chops to make sure that everything's working as well as it can together. And then real quick, another thing I do to really tighten up the sample chops, if you listen closely, you can hear that there's some drums in the sample that are kind of playing way too offbeat compared to the rhythm of a drum beat. right? It sounds a little off. So normally if you just left the chops as they were, you would just kind of have to live with that in the beat. But something that I like to do is bounce this down into an audio file. And then as you can see right here, I manipulate the audio file to get rid of little snare hits and stuff like that I don't like by adding fades like this to make them less noticeable. Or for example, right here, I just took this bit of audio that was originally about this long and I just stretched it like this where a snare was hitting to kind of make it sound like there was no snare there. Now we got the main idea down with those two main sections of the sample, so I wanted to add drums. But if you remember earlier, I was talking about how one of my favorite things with these Griselda records is that the samples are so good that they don't even need to add drums and they have drumless songs. So I did not want to add some hard-hitting drum one-shots like you normally would, but if you listen to those drumless tracks from Griselda, you can hear that there are drums in the actual sample.
You going sooner? We the Death Squad, but I shoot solo on Rat Man. Right hand holding the steering wheel. Praise fly, praise stove, praise both.
And I felt like the sample that I flipped, there was really not much going on with the drums. They were super, super low in the mix. So I felt like it needed a little something there to just tie it all together. But like I said, instead of just using those hard hitting and normal drums, I went back onto TrackLib and searched by year and instrument to find a drum break that was from the 70s because I specifically wanted it to be from an old record so it had that warm, gentle kind of sound to the drums, not too crunchy and hard hitting, and I found this. So because this sample is so human, because it's, you know, live played drums, it didn't perfectly fit with the groove that I had kind of had in my head for the drums originally with those chops that I laid down. So in order to keep that rhythm and bounce that the original drum loop that we used up here to record the chops on had, but keep the texture of these sampled drums, what I actually did is chop up each individual sound of this little drum break right here, and then I moved every single one of them, stretched them and all that to kind of match the rhythm and all that the original drum break was doing. As you can see, like, boom, we got a kick hit right here, kick hit, snare is hitting at about the same time, hi-hat comes in, it's a little quieter, but you get the point. Like if we listen to them on top of each other, they're both following the same rhythm. Then when you take this away, you get that gentle kind of warped sample drum sound. And then to spice up the end of each drum pattern, I went back into the sample and I saw this little drum fill right before the main part comes in the intro. And I thought that would fit perfect. So I chopped that up, matched it to what we had going on, and you get this. Once I had the drums down, I wanted to enhance the texture, going back to what Conductor was saying with the texture and feeling being essential to his sound. So when I was listening to that isolated drum track from that other 70s record, there was this talking and white noise in the beginning that just sounded sick. So I just layered that in with the main sample and then added some dusty chimes just to make it sound a little bit more sampled, and the textures sound like this. Now, I'm gonna get into finishing that beat in just a second, but first, I wanna talk to you some more about TrackLib. Like I mentioned earlier, they just dropped their brand new mobile app, which is super dope for going through samples and making beat starter ideas while you're out on the go, waiting for a ride, sitting in school, whatever you might be doing. I have the app open right here, and as you can see, just like the normal TrackLib, you can go in and search all these different songs. You can filter by genre, key, BPM, the year that it was released. So if you want some vintage stuff, you can go in and just put the years that you want. And then let's say you like this sample right here, you just click this button and it adds it to your beat maker. And this is the cool part about the new app, is you can go in here and essentially swipe left and right on samples to test them out with other stuff. So I got this little drum beat that I like from their royalty-free sounds. And now I can just go in and just play different samples on top of that to see what kind of matches that vibe that I'm going for with those drums. Similar to how the Alchemist was doing it earlier. You can adjust the volume, so if I want the drums a little bit more quiet than the sample, or the other way around, I can mess around with it. And we can just press play right here. Right? And instantly you get a little idea. Swipe left and right on these samples. Alright, let's see what this chop sounds like. And let's say I wanted to pitch this up. I can mess with that. And then once you get something like that you like, you can just save the beat up here, gospel beat idea. So whenever you got spare time, you can just open up the TrackLib app and make little beat ideas, little sample chop ideas that you can later bring into your computer and actually flesh out into full finished products. So if you want to be cooking up and digging for samples no matter where you are, click that first link in the description down below to check out TrackLib's new app. And just overall, TrackLib is a great platform if you're looking for samples that aren't going to kill you with copyright claims that you're guaranteed to be able to release. It's the goated place to go if you want easy to clear samples. But yeah, link in the description to check that out. Anyways, once I had the foundation figured out, it felt a little bit bare still. And on a lot of these Griselda records, the samples have super fire vocals in them. So I went back into the sample and started chopping out some more tiny little vocal chops here and there. And I wasn't trying to grab huge vocal phrases because if you listen to the chops on $500 ounces, you can hear that the vocal isn't really saying any words. It's like as soon as it's trying to get a word out, it gets chopped right away. One, I feel like it just sounds sick. But two, it also makes it a lot easier to rap on because the rapper isn't having to compete with the voice. And also the vocal sample isn't too wordy and kind of limiting what the rapper could talk about on top of that sample. So anyways, once I had all those little catchy vocal parts that I liked, I just tried kind of playing them on top of the main chop and seeing where they could fit into what I already had going. Then I put the sample completely unchopped for the intro and the beat was finished. And I'll play the full beat at the end of this video, but first let's get into that second beat where I'm going to show you how to make vintage samples 100% from scratch. Before we go in and make the sample, I just want to go over some key elements that I see over and over in these Griselda samples. First being a Rhodes electric piano, super detuned bells, strings, super crazy piano runs like the ones we did in the first beat, and overall just a fucked up, gritty, warped kind of vibe to the sample with super ugly, dissonant chords like the ones on this song. So, with all that in mind, let's get started. First, let's start out with the Rhodes to build a main foundation and chord progression for the beat, similar to these tracks. I think the Rhodes works so well with this vibe because it's kind of laid back and chill, not as bright as a piano, but it still has that soulful sound. So I grabbed the UAD Electra 88 keys and put down this chord progression, which I'll explain more on in a second. All right, so there's a few key things that you want to keep in mind when you're making these Griselda chord progressions. The first thing is that you're going to want to use suspended notes. And what that means essentially is if we go up here and we make a C minor chord, like this, right? Just a standard C minor chord. All you're going to do is drop this note down 1 to give it that dark vibe. And then to really make it sound really dark and really gritty, you're going to also layer in this note. Whenever you have two notes that are directly on top of each other, like these two notes, for example, it sounds very uneasy and ugly and it gives off that Griselda kind of feeling. So this kind of chord is what you really want to build everything around. And essentially what I did here is I did that little technique right here. And then I just messed around playing other notes until I got chords that felt kind of cool, jazzy and soulful, but at the same time like uneasy and like kind of questionable. And again, like really listen to how this sounds together. Very uneasy sounding compared to if you just got rid of this. Definitely a key thing to get that kind of sound. From there, I wanted to spice the progression up just a little bit, so I added in some high chord sprinkles with the Rhodes again. So to make these high chord sprinkles, essentially all you're gonna do is play the exact same chord that you were playing right here, right? If we were to copy this into the other MIDI, then I'm playing the same notes, more or less, right? It's the same exact notes. It's just like an octave up and it's played very loosely. That's only half the battle. If you just play it how I have it right here, sounds kind of dinky and cheap, right? So what you want to do is have the sustain all the way up, which essentially emulates a sustain pedal that a piano player would use that lets the notes play out forever and ever, even if your hands come off of the keyboard. So then it sounds like this. Adds a nice little ear candy. Next up, to fill the progression out a little bit, I just added in a live bass line that I played using the Scarby Rickenbacker bass, and I just kind of loosely followed the root notes of that chord progression we did with the Rose. Now I wanted to add another key instrument to that dark Griselda sound, detuned bells. These bells give off a ton of that dark Griselda kind of energy, super warped, organic, and just weird sounding. So to make it sound as authentic as possible, instead of just using a cheap VST sound, I went and grabbed my real glockenspiel that I have in my studio, and I recorded this simple little top line idea that's doing that same two notes playing on top of each other, dissonant, ugly kind of sound. Take a listen. Next up, in a lot of these old soul records, you can hear guitars, which sometimes have a huge role to play in the sample, but a lot of the times they're just more like this little ear candy that just adds a little bit more soul and flavor to it. Take a listen to the guitars on Big Ass Bracelet.
As I look back, I watch him.
I wanted to take some inspiration from the guitars on that, but not do too much and ruin the simplicity of this loop, because simplicity in general is a very big reason why Griselda's production is so genius. So anyways, I added in this little guitar accent from my Vintage Essentials kit, where I'm essentially just sliding my hand up the guitar like this. And at this point, the progression felt cool, but it just felt like it was missing a little bit of bite, something more in your face that grabs your ear. So once again, I took some inspiration from those dark, gritty pianos. I didn't want something too predictable and normal for the piano on this, so instead of just clicking something boring in with a VST, I went over to my real upright piano in my studio, and I just improvised for a few minutes playing random jazzy licks here and there, not really thinking about exactly how everything's working together, but just trying to find a cool moment. Kind of how Alchemist is digging for samples and just randomly finding a cool little section to chop. I'm essentially just playing on the piano and then going back to the recording and finding a cool little moment that loops nicely. At this point, the melody was almost done. I just wanted to add another subtle touch to enhance the vibe. Strings.
Yeah. Can't try.
So, although I love the super in-your-face and luxurious strings on that kitchen light sample, I felt like it would be doing a little bit too much adding this into all the stuff that we've already got going on. But on $500 ounces, it's got those super low-key, kind of eerie tremolo-sounding strings, and I felt like something subtle like that would fit perfect in the sample. So I went into my Vintage Essentials pack and grabbed a violin tremolo one-shot and some violin trill one-shots, layered those all in together, matched them to the key of the sample, and you get this. Now, an essential part, like Conductor was talking about, texture. On this sample, I added textures by adding in some tape noise that I recorded from my 1978 tape machine, a cymbal ride crashing kind of drum break, and then some more chimes. And all those sounds are just kind of there to make it sound more sampled and less like it's something that was made in a computer with VSTs. Also, similar to how I put that sample through the chroma console in the first beat, I did the same thing with each instrument on this loop. And so far, I've been playing you the version that's already through the chroma console, but take a listen to how big of a difference in the texture and tone of everything there is when it's processed through something like that compared to just straight raw VSTs and recordings. Now, this is already sounding sick, and you could definitely stop here, but I wanted it to sound even more fucked up and grimy and just weird, uneasy kind of feeling. Like the samples on Mama's Primetime, John Woo Flick, and Eurostep.
Yeah.
Rocking on Sakai in the 911 soft top. Hopped out, big drum on it, had to sort of.
If I say so, spray a roller, spray the fold up. Niggas good fellas like Ray.
So to really get that old, sampled, fucked up kind of texture, I put the whole entire melody that we just made through my 1978 reel-to-reel tape recorder, and I used a certain strategy when I was recording it onto tape to make sure it sounded very detuned, warped, and just weird. So essentially, whenever I'm recording onto the tape moves, right? And if anything is to interrupt the tape spinning and going through the recording right here, whether that be dust on the tape or the tape is broken or something like that, it's going to create little pitch wobbles that give it that imperfect, weird kind of sound. So I can kind of artificially create those moments by just kind of like touching this like so, right? Just kind of slowing down the wheel a little bit like that. That's pretty dramatic, but little taps like that are gonna add these weird, cool little detune things like you can hear right now. Before I get into chopping this up and adding drums, one reason a lot of people struggle with making vintage samples sound realistic is because they're using cheap VST sounds. If you listen to these old records, the reason they have such a raw and soulful texture is because they're actually being played on real live instruments, which is why I use my live glockenspiel, piano, guitar, etc. to make it feel more authentic. And also why I spend thousands of dollars every month working with session musicians and Grammy-nominated vocalists to bring my ideas in my head for these vintage samples to life. And if you want access to those live instrument recordings and vocals that you can use to make your own vintage samples without having to spend an arm and a leg on session musicians, you can grab over 5,000 of them in my Vintage Essentials kit, and I'll have that as the second link in the description down below. And little fun fact, my vintage samples have been used by Benny the Butcher and Conway the Machine.
Ain't no Hawaiian team, the streets taught us that. But play your role, the mascot.
Niggas had desire traps and a heroin house and made more weekly than a doctor make yearly.
So you can trust that you're gonna get some quality stuff. But yeah, the link will be in the description, and let's get back into the video. Anyways, now that we have the sample made, it's time to add a key part to these Griselda beats: repetitive sample chops. With one of their signature chops being something that I like to call the 1-1-1 turnaround on the 4. Kind of a bad name for it. Let me know in the comments if you have a better name for it. But essentially, it's just the same chop playing over and over 3 times in a row, and then on the 4th bar it changes up to kind of break the repetitiveness and turn around the pattern into that looping thing so it just doesn't get too boring. Take a listen to these examples.
This man. Yeah, I'm back, nigga. What you talking about? Fuck all that, who the best?
So I pitched the whole sample up by 1 in my sampler, chopped it up every half bar, and put down this pattern. I wanted a bit more variation than that for the whole beat, so I did a B section using that same 1-1-1, change it around on the 4th chop kind of strategy, and got this. If you ask me, the chops are sounding good, so it's time to get into the drums. And a ton of these Griselda songs have this super classic and simple hip-hop kick and snare pattern. Take a listen to these kind of boom boom ch, boom boom ch kind of drums that you can hear on these records. So to get these drums started, I grabbed a kick and a snare sound from the Vintage Essentials drum kit, and I played them in live on my MIDI to kind of emulate playing them on an MPC. And following that basic kind of rhythm, you get this. Then I added a hi-hat, and there's really nothing to it. It's just a hi-hat that I played in live, make sure it's unquantized and has that human kind of feeling. Next, I wanted to add a little drum fill just to use as a transition for our beat, similar to this song.
Swim, niggas, swim, niggas, swim, niggas. Stop.
And with doing something similar to that, this is what it sounds like in our... And finally, I felt like it just needed a little bit of low end to fill it out, and I loved the off time bass that you can hear in Dr. Bird's. The bass not coming in on the one just makes it feel super weird and unpredictable, but I love it. So I did the same thing in our beat, and instead of having the beat come in on the one with that first kick, I dragged it over just a bit and had it come in with the second kick hit instead of the first one, and you get this for the finished drums. And once I had that, the whole beat was finished. But before I play both of these beats, if you've enjoyed this video so far, hit that subscribe bell so I can keep making more of these for you guys. But anyways, let's take a listen to both of these beats and let me know if I did my job.
There is nothing there is your life, your body there, your life, your body there.
Real quick, just a reminder while I still got you, if you want access to the best place to find your samples online, make sure to click the first link in the description down below to check out TrackLib, the sponsor for this video. Their new app is a game changer if you're like me and you have ideas all the time on the go and you want to be creating no matter where you are, what you're doing. Again, link will be in the description to check out TrackLib in their brand new app on the App Store. But anyways, I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.